There are some places in this world that hold your soul, not because they are fancy, but because every inch of them is covered in memories. For me, that place was the Oakridge Family Diner. It sat on the corner of 4th Street and Maple, its red neon sign flickering softly against the twilight sky. The paint on the window frames was peeling, and the vinyl on the corner booth had been patched up 3 different times over the decades. To a stranger passing by in a fast car, it looked like a dying relic of an old town, just another cheap, greasy spoon serving $5 coffee and lukewarm pie. But to me, Arthur Pendleton, it was the sanctuary where my entire life had been written. I am 73 years old. My hands are thick, rough, and covered in faint gray scars from 45 years of pulling levers, loading cargo, and working double shifts down at the rail yard. My knees make a dull, popping sound every time I walk up a flight of stairs, and my spine sits a little lower than it used to. When you spend almost half a century doing heavy physical labor, your body becomes a tally mark of every hard day you ever survived. 50 years ago, on a cold Tuesday night in November, I sat in booth 4 of that very diner and asked a bright-eyed girl named Clara to marry me. We didn't have money for a diamond ring. I had bought her a simple silver band with a small blue glass stone wrapped inside a paper napkin. She cried, laughed, and kissed my flour-dusted cheek right there while the jukebox played in the background. 30 years ago, we celebrated our son Marcus's high school graduation in that same booth. I remembered how proud I felt, wearing my one clean suit, watching him eat a giant slice of chocolate cake while Clara wiped a tear from her eye. And 4 years ago, after Clara lost her long, silent battle with cancer, that diner became the only place where the world didn't feel completely empty. I would go there every morning at 7 o'clock. I would sit in booth 4, order a mug of black coffee and 2 eggs, and look at the quiet space across the table where Clara used to sit. The owner, an old friend named George, never rushed me. He would leave the coffee pot on the table and let me sit for as long as I needed. It was my routine, my piece of peace in a world that was moving far too fast. Then, 6 months ago, my life took a turn I never expected. My son, Marcus, had grown into a successful middle manager at a regional logistics corporation downtown. I loved Marcus with all my heart, but over the last 3 years, he had married a woman named Brenda. Brenda was 34 years old, sharp-tongued, and obsessed with social status. She was the kind of person who judged a human being's entire worth by the brand logo on their shoes, the price tag on their purse, and the neighborhood they lived in. She spoke in a clipped, patronizing tone and treated anyone who earned a living with their hands as if they were second-class citizens. When George, the owner of the diner, passed away suddenly from a heart attack, the diner was put up for sale by his distant relatives who lived out of state. I was heartbroken. The thought of my sacred sanctuary being closed down or torn down by some heartless developer kept me awake at night. I didn't tell Marcus or Brenda, but I went straight to my local bank, pulled out my lifetime savings, and quietly spoke to the estate lawyer handling George's affairs. What Marcus and Brenda didn't know was that while I lived in a simple 2-bedroom house and drove an old Navy pickup truck, I wasn't broke. For 45 years, I had quietly invested my overtime pay into local commercial land trusts and dividend stocks. I didn't care about sports cars or designer suits. I lived simply, and when George's diner went up for sale, I didn't just have enough money to buy the business. I bought the entire commercial building, the land beneath it, and the surrounding parking lot outright, holding the title deed inside a private family trust. I didn't brag about it. I didn't post it online. I simply wanted to make sure the diner stayed open, the old staff kept their jobs, and booth 4 remained right where it was. I was just an old man who wanted to keep his memories alive. But Brenda saw my quiet, simple life as proof that I was nothing more than a broke, embarrassing burden. And on a bright Saturday afternoon, in front of a room full of customers, her arrogance would finally push her over a cliff she couldn't climb back from. Section 2. The Saturday Afternoon Incident. It was a crisp Saturday afternoon in mid-October. The autumn sun was glowing through the diner's front windows, casting a warm yellow light across the checkered linoleum floor. I was sitting in my usual spot, booth 4, wearing my favorite light brown canvas work jacket and my worn leather boots. A steaming mug of black coffee sat in front of me, next to a small, framed photo of Clara that I kept tucked inside my pocket Bible. The diner was busy. Local families were enjoying lunch, Truckers were stopping through for fresh coffee, and the clatter of silver forks against porcelain plates filled the air with a comforting, familiar hum. Around 1 o'clock, the heavy front door swung open, and the brass bell attached to the frame rang out loudly. In walked Brenda, accompanied by 3 of her high society friends, women dressed in head-to-toe designer leisure wear, carrying oversized leather bags, and talking in high-pitched, exaggerated voices. Brenda looked entirely out of place in the neighborhood diner. She looked around the room with an expression of intense disgust, as if the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee was personally offensive to her. "I can't believe the boutique catering spot down the street was fully booked," Brenda complained loudly to her friends, not caring who heard her. "Now we have to get a quick salad in this dreadful little grease bucket before our spa appointments." My heart gave a small, heavy thud in my chest. I considered quietly slipping my morning paper up over my face to avoid an awkward interaction, but it was too late. Brenda's sharp eyes scanned the room and locked directly onto booth 4. She froze, her eyebrows knitting together in annoyance. "Arthur," Brenda said, stepping over to my table, her high heels making a loud, sharp clicking noise against the floor. "What are you doing here?" I set my mug down gently and offered her a small, polite nod. "Hello, Brenda," I said softly. "I'm just enjoying my weekend coffee and reading the paper. How are you?" Brenda didn't answer my question. She turned to her 3 friends, who were standing behind her, whispering to one another and giggling while looking at my faded canvas jacket. Brenda's face flushed red with visible embarrassment. "Arthur, why do you insist on coming to these trashy, run-down places?" Brenda snapped under her breath, leaning over the table so only I could hear, though her voice carried plenty of venom. "You look like a homeless man sitting here. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for me to run into my husband's broke father looking like this in public?" I looked into her eyes, feeling a quiet, heavy sadness rather than anger. "Brenda, this diner has been part of our family for 50 years, I said calmly. "Your husband's mother and I sat in this very booth when we were young. There's nothing trashy about hardworking people having a meal." "Oh, spare me the working class speech," Brenda hissed, her voice rising in pitch as her frustration grew. "You've been living off your tiny rail yard pension for years, dragging down Marcus's image every time he tries to impress his executives. You drive a beat-up truck, you wear clothes from 30 years ago, and you hang out in dumps like this." The diner had begun to quiet down. The waitress, an elderly woman named Martha who had worked at the diner for 25 years, stopped near the counter holding a glass coffee pot, her eyes wide with shock at how Brenda was speaking to me. "Brenda, please," I said, keeping my voice low. "You're making a scene. Let's not do this here." That was the wrong thing to say to a woman like Brenda. Being told what to do in front of her wealthy friends lit a fire under her pride. She snapped completely. "Making a scene," Brenda practically yelled, throwing her hands up in the air. The entire diner went dead silent. The clinking of forks stopped. Every single customer turned their head to look at booth 4. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Arthur," Brenda shouted, her voice echoing off the tin ceiling. "Look at you. You're an old, broke, useless parasite who contributes nothing to society. You sit here drinking $2 coffee all day because you can't afford a real life." "Brenda, stop it right now," Martha the waitress spoke up, stepping forward from the counter, her voice trembling with indignation. "Arthur is a good man, and he's been coming here longer than you've been alive. You have no right to speak to him like that." Brenda turned on Martha like a wild animal, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "Mind your own business, you glorified play carrier." Brenda spat at Martha. "This old man is an embarrassment to my family. He brings down the property value of this entire block just by standing on the sidewalk." Brenda turned back to me, leaning right into my face, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. "Get out of my sight, old man!" Brenda screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a manicured finger toward the glass doors. "Get out of this diner right now, before I call the police and have you removed for disturbing my friends." The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the wall clock over the kitchen doorway. I looked at Brenda. I looked at her 3 snickering friends. I looked at Martha, whose eyes were filled with tears of anger on my behalf. And I looked at the young shift manager, a 30-year-old man named David, who was standing behind the cash register, looking pale and terrified. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my coffee. I simply folded my newspaper neatly and set it on the table. I placed a $5 bill next to my mug to cover my coffee. Then, I picked up the small, framed photo of Clara, slipped it safely back into my jacket pocket, and stood up. My knees made a small popping sound as I stood to my full height, towering over Brenda. "You think I'm broke, Brenda?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, dropping into a deep, gravelly tone that made her step back half an inch. "You think this building is a rundown dump?" "It is a dump," Brenda sneered, trying hard to maintain her arrogant composure. "And it won't be open much longer anyway. A real estate group is buying up this block, and places like this are going to be demolished." A tiny, cold smile touched the corner of my lips. "Is that so?" I whispered. I didn't say another word. I walked past Brenda and her friends, my heavy leather boots thudding softly against the floor. I pushed open the front glass door, the brass bell ringing one last time, and stepped out into the autumn breeze. Brenda thought she had won. She thought she had humiliated a helpless old man and chased him out into the cold. She had no idea that I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking directly across the street to my truck, where my leather briefcase was sitting on the passenger seat, containing the master title deed to the building, the property lease agreements, and the phone number of the master trust attorney. Brenda wanted me out of her sight. By 4 o'clock this afternoon, I was going to make sure she never set foot on this property ever again. Section 3. The master deed on the passenger seat. The autumn wind whipped through my gray hair as I crossed 4th Street. My knees throbbed with every step, but deep inside my chest, the cold, heavy sadness had transformed into something hard and unbreakable. I reached my old Navy pickup truck, unlocked the driver's side door, and pulled out my worn brown leather briefcase from the passenger seat. I rested it on the hood of the truck, popped the brass latches, and pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Oakridge Commercial Real Estate Trust. Inside sat the master deed to the diner building, the commercial land lease certificates for the adjacent parking lot, and the direct phone number for my trust attorney, Mr. Harrison Vance. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed Harrison's office. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Arthur," Harrison's deep, professional voice came through the line. "Good afternoon. How are you holding up?" "Harrison," I said, my voice low and steady as steel. "I need you to pull up the master commercial lease for the Oakridge Diner property immediately." "Already have it on my screen, Arthur," Harrison replied, hearing the tone in my voice. "Is there a problem with the building? I want an emergency tenant restriction order issued for the premises right now," I said. "And I want a formal notice of commercial lease audit hand-delivered to my daughter-in-law, Brenda Pendleton, and her husband, Marcus." There was a brief pause on the line. "Arthur, if we execute the master landlord restriction clause, we can legally bar specific individuals from entering the commercial property for disturbing the peace and violating the community integrity covenant. Is Brenda at the diner?" "She's sitting in booth 4 right now," I said, looking across the street through the diner's large front windows. "She just humiliated the staff, made a public scene, and shouted at me to get out of her sight. She believes this building is a rundown dump about to be demolished." Harrison let out a heavy sigh over the phone. "She has no idea you bought the entire commercial block 3 months ago, does she?" "None," I answered. "She thinks I'm a broke old man, living on a rail yard pension. It's time to correct her misunderstanding. I'm sending my senior associate, David Sterling, with the legal notice right now," Harrison stated firmly. "He's 3 blocks away. I'll also notify the regional police precinct to have an officer on standby in case she refuses to vacate private trust property." "Thank you, Harrison." I hung up the phone, placed the manila folder back into my briefcase, and walked across the street toward the diner. Inside the diner, Brenda and her 3 friends were sitting at a large booth near the center of the room. Brenda was loudly perusing the menu, complaining to the young manager, David, about the limited options. "This menu is ridiculous," Brenda sneered, tossing the laminated card onto the table. "You don't even have organic gluten-free options. What kind of backward establishment is this?" David stood near the table, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, trying his best to remain professional. "Ma'am, we are a traditional family diner. We've served the same fresh, homemade comfort food for 40 years. "Well, 40 years is 40 years too long," Brenda scoffed, taking a sip of her water and immediately making a face. This place needs to be flattened. When the new real estate company takes over next month, I'm going to personally make sure Marcus speaks to the developers to have this eyesore demolished. Before David could reply, the heavy front door of the diner opened again. I walked back in, holding my brown leather briefcase in one hand and my mahogany cane in the other. Brenda looked up from her table, and her face instantly flushed with dark, furious rage. "You again!" Brenda shrieked, slamming her hand down on the table. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I thought I told you to get out of my sight, old man. Did you not hear me the first time?" The entire diner fell completely silent once again. Martha the waitress put down her tray, her eyes darting between me and Brenda. "I heard you clearly, Brenda," I said quietly, stopping near the center aisle. "Then why are you back inside?" Brenda yelled, stepping out into the aisle, her high heels clicking loudly. "Are you senile? Do I need to call the police to have you dragged out of here for harassment? You don't belong in a place like this." "Actually, Brenda," a crisp, sharp voice echoed from the front doorway. "You are the one who does not belong here." Brenda froze. She turned her head toward the door. Stepping into the diner was a tall man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a dark leather folder, accompanied by a uniformed police officer from the local precinct. Brenda's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "What is this? Who are you?" The man in the suit stepped forward, standing right beside me. "My name is David Sterling, Senior Legal Counsel representing the Oakridge Commercial Real Estate Trust," the lawyer announced in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. "And I am here to serve a formal notice of immediate revocation and commercial trespass." Brenda let out a forced, nervous laugh, glancing at her three friends, who were now looking very uneasy. "A trespass notice?" Brenda scoffed. "On who?" "This old man." "Good. Take him away." Attorney Sterling didn't even look at me. He opened his folder, pulled out a thick legal document stamped with a gold state seal, and held it directly out toward Brenda. "This notice is served to you, Mrs. Brenda Pendleton," Attorney Sterling said with razor-sharp authority. "Under Section 12 of the Master Commercial Land Lease, the property owner holds absolute authority to immediately ban any individual who engages in abusive conduct toward staff, disturbs the peace, or threatens the integrity of the establishment." Brenda's jaw dropped. "What? Banned? From a cheap grease bucket diner? Are you insane? My husband is a corporate manager. You can't ban me from a public building." "This is not a public building, Mrs. Pendleton," Attorney Sterling corrected calmly. "This entire property, including the land, the structure, the parking lot, and the business operating within it, is privately owned." Brenda pointed a shaking finger at me. "I don't care who owns it. This old parasite was harassing me." Attorney Sterling turned his gaze directly onto Brenda, his eyes cold as ice. "Mrs. Pendleton, the owner of this entire commercial block, is standing right beside me," Attorney Sterling declared. "Meet your master landlord, Mr. Arthur Pendleton." The diner was so silent you could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the pie display. Brenda's jaw hung open. Her manicured hand stayed frozen in midair, pointing at my chest, as if her entire body had been locked in place by a sudden freeze. Her three friends behind her stopped whispering, their faces going pale as they looked back and forth between the lawyer, the police officer, and my faded canvas work jacket. "W what?" Brenda finally stuttered out, her loud, sharp voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "What did you just say?" Attorney Sterling didn't repeat himself. He opened the leather folder wider, pulled out the certified master deed, and laid it flat on the table right in front of Brenda's water glass. 3 months ago, Mr. Arthur Pendleton purchased the Oakridge commercial block outright through his private family trust, Attorney Sterling explained, his voice ringing with absolute calm authority. "That includes this diner, the retail space next door, and the entire parking structure behind us. He is not a customer struggling to pay for $2 coffee, Mrs. Pendleton. He is the sole owner of the land beneath your feet." Brenda stared down at the document. Her eyes scanned the official gold seal, the state filing stamps, and my name written in thick, black ink at the bottom of the deed. Arthur Pendleton, sole trustee. "No!" Brenda whispered, taking a staggering step backward until her back hit the edge of the booth. "No, this is a mistake. Marcus told me. Marcus said his father was just living on a rail yard pension, he said. Marcus only knew what I needed him to know, I said, stepping forward. My voice wasn't loud or angry. It was heavy, steady, and filled with 45 years of quiet dignity. I spent my life working 12-hour shifts on steel tracks, Brenda. I didn't spend my money on silk scarves, expensive sports cars, or vanity. I invested every dollar I saved so that when people like George passed away, places with heart and history wouldn't be destroyed by people like you. Martha the waitress leaned against the counter, a proud, tearful smile spreading across her face. The shift manager, David, let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. Brenda's face turned from pale white to a deep, burning crimson. The humiliation was total. In front of a room full of local residents, the diner staff, a uniformed officer, and her own social climbing friends, the man she had called a broke parasite was revealed to be the very landlord who held the deed to the building. Her friends immediately grabbed their designer handbags, slid out of the booth, and hurried toward the door without saying a single word to Brenda. They didn't want to be anywhere near the fallout. Brenda Pendleton, the police officer, stepped forward, his tone firm and businesslike. As representative of the property owner, Mr. Sterling has requested your immediate removal from the premises for public disturbance. You need to gather your things and exit the building now. Wait! Please! Brenda panicked, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. The arrogant sneer was completely gone, replaced by desperate, frantic embarrassment. Arthur! I didn't mean those things. I was just stressed. I didn't know. That's the problem, Brenda, I said, looking into her eyes with a quiet, sad reflection. You only show respect when you think someone has money or power. You treat hardworking people like trash because you think their hands are dirty. You didn't care about my feelings when you thought I was poor. Arthur, please, she begged, her voice trembling. Don't do this. If Marcus finds out about this, Marcus is going to find out about a lot more than just this afternoon, Brenda, I replied coldly. Because this diner isn't the only property held by the Pendleton Family Trust. Brenda froze again, a new wave of panic hitting her face. What do you mean? I leaned down slightly, resting both hands on the top of my mahogany cane. The modern townhome you and Marcus live in downtown, the one with the granite kitchen and the private courtyard? I whispered softly. You paid the developer, but the developer holds a 30-year ground lease with my trust. And under Section 8 of that lease, any tenant who brings disgrace or legal disruption to the trust's commercial interests is subject to an immediate financial audit. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You told me to get out of her sight, Brenda, I said, turning my back on her and walking toward booth 4. Now get off my property. The police officer gestured toward the door. Let's go, ma'am. Don't make this difficult. Brenda grabbed her purse with shaking hands, her head held low, and hurried out the glass doors into the cold autumn wind, her high heels clicking frantically against the sidewalk as she fled in absolute disgrace. I sat back down in booth 4. Martha walked over, bringing a fresh, hot pot of black coffee, and filled my mug to the brim. Thank you, Arthur, Martha said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Martha. I smiled gently, picking up the hot mug. The battle in the diner was over, but I knew the real storm was just beginning. In less than an hour, my son Marcus would get the call that would tear the polished, fake mask off his marriage once and for all. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the autumn sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting long, dark shadows across the polished glass towers of the financial district downtown. Inside a spacious corner office on the 12th floor of a high-end logistics firm, my son Marcus was sitting at his mahogany desk. He was wearing an expensive navy suit, reviewing quarterly revenue reports on his dual monitors. He was a man who worked hard, but like many young men who climb the corporate ladder too quickly, he had become blinded by the shiny wrapper of success. His phone began to ring on the desk, a direct line from the firm's senior partner, Mr. Richard Sterling. Marcus straightened his tie, picked up the receiver, and answered with a polished, professional tone. Good afternoon, Mr. Sterling. I have the logistics audit ready for your review. Marcus! Mr. Sterling's voice came through the line, but there was no warmth in it. It was cold, heavy, and unusually sharp. Forget the logistics audit. I need you in the main board room immediately. And bring your personal financial statements. Marcus felt a sudden, icy knot form in his stomach. Is there a problem, sir? Your family's legal standing with our primary real estate trust has just been called into question, Mr. Sterling said flatly. 10 minutes, Marcus. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the receiver, his heart pounding against his ribs. He stood up, adjusted his coat, and walked down the carpeted hallway toward the executive boardroom. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what could have possibly gone wrong. When he opened the frosted glass doors of the boardroom, he didn't just see Mr. Sterling. Sitting at the far end of the long conference table was my trust attorney, Harrison Vance, holding a thick black ledger. Beside him sat 2 senior risk compliance officers from the bank. Marcus, take a seat, Mr. Sterling commanded, gesturing to the leather chair across from Harrison. Marcus sat down slowly, his palms sweating. Mr. Sterling. Harrison, what is this about? Did one of our commercial accounts default? Harrison Vance opened the thick black ledger and slid a single document across the polished table toward Marcus. Mr. Pendleton, Harrison began, his tone strictly professional. As you are aware, your corporate firm leases its regional warehouse fleet from the Oakridge Commercial Real Estate Trust. Furthermore, the private mortgage on your personal downtown townhouse is underwritten through a secondary commercial land lease tied directly to the same trust. Yes, of course, Marcus said, nodding quickly. We've never missed a payment. My wife Brenda manages our home equity accounts. 2 hours ago, Harrison continued coldly, an incident occurred at the Oakridge Family Diner. Your wife, Brenda Pendleton, publicly harassed, insulted, and attempted to unlawfully evict an individual from the premises. She made official threats regarding property demolition and engaged in severe verbal abuse toward the business staff. Marcus's face went pale. Anger and embarrassment flushed through his chest. Brenda, at the diner. I apologize, Harrison. Brenda can be a bit opinionated, but she didn't mean anything legal by it. I'll speak to her tonight and have her send an apology to the manager. Harrison leaned forward, resting his hands on the table, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. An apology will not suffice, Marcus, Harrison said softly. The individual your wife publicly humiliated, called a broke parasite, and screamed at to get out of her sight, was not a random customer. Marcus frowned, confusion washing over his face. Then who was it? Harrison pulled a certified copy of the master land deed from his folder and turned it toward Marcus. The man she insulted was the sole trustee and owner of the Oakridge Commercial Trust, Harrison declared. Your father, Mr. Arthur Pendleton. Marcus felt as though the air had been sucked completely out of his lungs. He stared at the signature at the bottom of the deed. The room seemed to spin around him. My father? Marcus gasped, his voice barely a whisper. No, that's impossible. My father worked at the rail yard. He drives a 20-year-old truck. He lives in a small 2-bedroom house. Your father spent 45 years living below his means, Marcus, Harrison replied, his voice filled with deep, quiet respect. He quietly built one of the most stable private land trusts in this county. He bought that diner block to protect old friends and preserve memories. And today, your wife stood in the middle of his building and told him he was worthless. Marcus buried his face in his hands, a deep, shuddering groan escaping his chest. The horror of what Brenda had done hit him like a freight train. He remembered every time Brenda had made fun of his father's clothes, every time she had refused to invite him to dinner, every time she had treated the old man who raised him like an embarrassing secret. Because of your wife's public misconduct and breach of trust covenants, Harrison added, the master trustee has ordered a full legal audit of your townhouse land lease. Furthermore, Mr. Sterling's firm is reviewing your partnership track based on ethical conduct standards. Mr. Sterling looked at Marcus with stern, disappointed eyes. Marcus, a man who allows his family to disrespect the foundation he built is not ready to lead this firm. You need to handle your personal affairs immediately. Marcus stood up, his hands shaking violently. He didn't say another word. He turned, ran out of the boardroom, down the hallway, and straight to the parking garage. He got into his car, gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, and dialed Brenda's number. When she answered, her voice was frantic, hysterical, and full of tears. Marcus! Oh my God, Marcus! You won't believe what happened at that stupid diner. Some fake lawyer came in with a cop and... "Shut your mouth, Brenda!" Marcus screamed into the phone, his voice echoing in the concrete garage. "Shut your mouth right now!" There was a sudden, terrified silence on the other end of the line. Brenda had never heard Marcus raise his voice like that in her entire life. "Marcus, babe, what's wrong?" she whimpered. "Go home right now," Marcus said, his voice trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. "Go home, sit in the living room, and don't touch a single thing until I get there. We are done." 20 minutes after that phone call, the tires of Marcus's luxury sedan shrieked against the quiet pavement of his gated neighborhood. He pulled into the driveway of his 3-story modern townhouse, a property clad in imported gray stone and floor-to-ceiling glass paneling. Inside, Brenda was pacing frantically across the heated hardwood floors of the living room. Her heart was beating like a trapped bird. She had spent the last half hour trying to call her 3 friends who had deserted her at the diner, but none of them had answered her calls. She was desperate to spin the story, desperate to make herself look like the victim of a bitter old man's elaborate trap. The front door slammed open with a force that made the glass light fixtures rattle. Marcus stepped into the foyer. He pulled off his blazer and threw it onto the entry bench, his breathing heavy, his face dark with a cold, terrifying anger that Brenda had never seen before. "Marcus!" Brenda cried out, taking a step toward him, forcing tears into her eyes to look defenseless. "Oh, thank God you're home. You have no idea what your father did to me today. He orchestrated this whole horrible setup at the diner just to embarrass me in front of—" "Shut up, Brenda," Marcus said, his voice flat, low, and laced with absolute poison. Brenda stopped mid-sentence, gasping softly. "Marcus, how can you talk to me like that? I'm your wife, and Arthur Pendleton is my father," Marcus roared, his voice echoing through the open concept home. "The man who worked double shifts in the rain and snow so I could go to college. The man who paid off my student debt. The man who never asked for a single dime back." Brenda tried to recover her posture, crossing her arms defensively. "Well, how was I supposed to know he had a private trust? He walks around looking like a homeless construction worker. He drives a rusty old truck. He tricked everyone. He didn't trick anyone," Marcus shouted, stepping closer, pointing a trembling finger at her face. "He lived quietly. He lived with dignity. You were the one who looked at a good, humble man and decided he was beneath you. You were the one who screamed at him in a room full of strangers and told him to get out of your sight." "I was stressed," Brenda shrieked back, her own anger flaring up as her victim routine failed. "I have a reputation to maintain, Marcus. My friends look to me for standards. Do you know how it looks when my father-in-law is sitting in a cheap grease bucket, looking like a beggar while I'm trying to host lunch?" Marcus let out a harsh, bitter laugh, shaking his head in total disbelief. "Reputation." Marcus spat the word out like it was garbage. "You want to talk about reputation, Brenda? Let me tell you what your reputation just cost us." Brenda blinked, a sudden chill running down her spine. What do you mean?" "I was just pulled into an emergency meeting with Mr. Sterling and the Senior Compliance Board," Marcus said, his eyes burning into hers. "My partnership track has been frozen indefinitely. The firm is opening a formal ethical review into my family background because of the public scene you caused." Brenda's face drained of color. "No, they can't do that over a diner argument." "It's not just the diner argument, Brenda," Marcus yelled. "The entire commercial warehouse complex our logistics company uses sits on land owned by the Oakridge Commercial Real Estate Trust. My boss's primary landlord is my father. When you insulted my father, you insulted the man who holds the keys to my company's entire operation." Brenda stumbled backward, her hand reaching out to steady herself against the granite kitchen island. No, Marcus, please. "And that's not even the worst of it," Marcus added, his voice dropping into a dark, hollow whisper. Before Brenda could speak, the sharp, heavy ring of the front doorbell sounded through the house. Marcus turned without a word and pulled open the heavy front door. Standing on the porch was Attorney Harrison Vance, flanked by 2 formal couriers holding legal binders. "Good afternoon, Marcus," Harrison said quietly, stepping inside the foyer. "Mrs. Pendleton." Brenda shrank back into the kitchen, terror taking over her face completely. "Why is he here?" "Marcus, make him leave," Harrison opened a thick manila folder and pulled out 2 formal documents stamped with red state notary seals. Under Section 8 of the Oakridge residential ground lease, Harrison announced, reading clearly from the paper, the master trustee has formally issued a notice of immediate financial audit and lease compliance for property 14. Brenda shook her head frantically. What does that mean? We pay our mortgage. We own this house. You own the wooden frame and the furniture inside, Mrs. Pendleton, Harrison stated coldly. You do not own the land underneath it. The ground lease is held by the Pendleton Trust. Under the terms of the Trust's character covenant, any lessee who brings public legal liability or moral disgrace upon the Trust is subject to immediate lease termination. Termination! Brenda screamed, her voice cracking in pure panic. You're evicting us? You have 72 hours to clear your personal belongings from the property, Harrison replied calmly, setting the legal notice on the glass console table. If the premises are not vacated by Tuesday at noon, county deputies will secure the perimeter. Harrison turned to Marcus, his expression softening slightly with pity. Marcus, your father wanted me to give you a personal message. Marcus wiped a tear from his eye, stepping forward. What did Dad say? Harrison looked directly into Marcus's eyes. He said, a house built on pride and disrespect will always collapse when the wind blows. If you want to find your foundation again, son, you know where booth 4 is. Harrison turned on his heel and walked out the door with his couriers, leaving the heavy front door open to the chilly evening air. Brenda fell to her knees on the marble floor, sobbing hysterically, surrounded by her expensive furniture, her designer bags, and the shattered pieces of her artificial life. Marcus, please fix this. Brenda wept, reaching out to grab the hem of his trousers. Call your father. Beg him. Tell him I'm sorry. I'll go to the diner. I'll sweep the floors. Just don't let them take our house. Marcus looked down at the woman he had married, a woman who only cared about the house, the money, and the status, even while begging for forgiveness. He pulled his leg back, stepping completely out of her reach. My father gave me everything, Brenda, Marcus said, tears streaming down his face as he looked at her with pure disgust. And I let you treat him like dirt because I was too weak to stand up to your arrogance. I'm not making that mistake again. Marcus walked over to his blazer on the bench, picked it up, and pulled out his keys. Where are you going? Brenda shrieked from the floor. You can't leave me here alone. I'm going to pack a small bag, Marcus said coldly, not even looking back at her. And then I'm going to sign divorce papers. You wanted a luxury life, Brenda. Now you can figure out how to pay for it yourself. 3 months had passed since the chilly autumn afternoon when the quiet in booth 4 was shattered. The winter frost had settled over the town, dusting the window frames of the Oakridge Family Diner with a delicate layer of white. Inside, the radiator clinked softly in the corner, throwing a cozy, comforting heat across the room. The smell of fresh coffee, fried eggs, and warm cinnamon toast filled the air. I sat in my usual spot, booth 4, wearing my simple brown canvas jacket. On the table beside my mug sat the small, framed photograph of Clara. The diner had never been livelier. After news of the incident spread through the community, local residents flooded the restaurant, not out of curiosity for the legal drama, but to support a neighborhood institution that had stood for half a century. The staff had received raises, the kitchen had been upgraded with modern equipment, and Martha was smiling brighter than she had in years. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, the front door swung open, ringing the brass bell attached to the frame. A man stepped into the diner, wiping his snowy boots on the floor mat. He was wearing a simple blue denim jacket, dark trousers, and work boots. His hands were calloused, and he carried a modest leather duffel bag over his shoulder. It was Marcus. He looked thinner than he used to, and the expensive tailored suits were completely gone. But the stressed, frantic look that had plagued his eyes for the last 3 years had vanished, replaced by a quiet, grounded calm. Marcus scanned the room, saw me sitting in booth 4, and took a deep, steady breath. He walked slowly down the center aisle, his heavy boots making a soft, familiar sound against the linoleum. Hello, Dad, Marcus said softly, stopping at the edge of the table. I looked up from my paper and pointed to the vinyl seat across from me. Sit down, son. It's cold outside. Marcus slid into the booth, the very same booth where his mother and I had sat 50 years ago, and where he used to eat chocolate cake as a boy. He set his duffel bag on the floor beside his feet. Martha walked over, carrying a steaming pot of black coffee. She didn't say a word about the past. She simply smiled gently at Marcus, filled a fresh ceramic mug, and set it down in front of him. "Thank you, Martha," Marcus said softly. When Martha stepped away, Marcus sat quietly for a long moment, staring down into the black coffee. The last 90 days had completely dismantled his old life. Following the lease termination audit, Brenda's true nature was fully exposed. When she realized the luxury townhouse was gone and Marcus had filed for divorce, she attempted to sue for half of the family trust assets, only to be shut down completely by Harrison Vance in court, as the pre-existing land trust was entirely protected under premarital inheritance laws. Left with no legal leverage and forced to pay her own mounting legal debts, Brenda had been forced to move out of the state, her social status completely shattered. Marcus had resigned from his high-stress corporate position downtown. He had taken a position as a senior operations supervisor at a local freight yard nearby, earning an honest, middle-class living managing rail schedules. He lived in a simple, quiet 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks away from my house. "How was your shift today, Marcus?" I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. "It was hard, Dad," Marcus admitted, looking across the table at me, tears welling up in his eyes. We moved 40 freight cars through the ice. My hands were freezing and my back aches, but for the first time in 10 years, I slept through the entire night. He reached across the table, his rough, calloused hand resting gently beside Clara's framed photograph. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Marcus choked out, his voice cracking with genuine, deep emotion. "I let myself get blinded by shiny things. I let someone make me feel ashamed of the hands that raised me, worked for me and fed me. I forgot who I was." I reached out and covered my son's hand with my own. My scars met his calluses. "A man isn't defined by the height of his office building or the price tag on his car, Marcus," I said softly, my voice filled with warmth. "True wealth isn't something you display to impress people who don't care about you. It's found in the integrity of your work, the dignity of your character, and the way you treat the people who have nothing to offer you but respect." Marcus wiped a tear from his cheek and gave me a firm, genuine nod. "I get it now, Dad. I really do." "Good," I smiled, gesturing to the menu. "Now order some dinner. You look like you need a warm meal." We sat in booth 4 for 2 hours, talking, laughing, and remembering the old days while the snow fell softly outside the diner windows. Moral of the story: never judge a person's worth by their outward appearance, their simple clothes, or their humble lifestyle. Respect is not something earned through arrogance, expensive titles, or financial dominance. It is built on honor, kindness, and how we treat those around us. Those who build their lives on pride, arrogance, and disrespect for others will eventually find that their foundation is nothing more than dust. But those who live with humility, hard work, and loyalty to their family will always have a home that no storm can ever break.